The theme of our conversation today is going to be about be human, but be whole. And before we dive into this topic, I brought you a poem by one of Fernando Pessoa's pseudonyms, which is Ricardo Reis. A short poem, I think it really ties into our theme. This poem says the following: to be great, be whole, nothing of yours should exaggerate or exclude. Be whole in everything, put all you are, even in the smallest thing you do. So, in every lake the whole moon shines, because it lives high. In other words, remember especially this first verse: to be great and be whole, nothing of yours should exaggerate or exclude. This has a lot to do with what we're going to talk about today. Shall we get started with our chat? Well, first of all, I'd like to draw your attention to several situations that are really obvious to us. It's interesting because an idea, within a certain context, seems like the most obvious thing in the world. Yet in another context, it seems strange and doubtful to us. It's sometimes a lack of establishing a logical line between all our thoughts. If we had this logical line, a lot of things that seem doubtful to us would certainly be true or certainly false. But we almost follow different rules depending on the environment we're in. Just look at these contexts to understand what I'm trying to say. Common sense teaches us that when you're on a diet, you should eat what the diet prescribes. Whether you're at home, at work, or anywhere else. In other words, there's no such thing as, I'm working now, the diet is only at home. No, a serious diet is everywhere, or it's nowhere. It won't have any effect. Another area. In time management, which I usually teach, we say it's necessary to have just one schedule. But sometimes I have things to do at work, things to do at university, and things to do at home. Yes, but you're just one person. If you don't organize all of this within your time, which is just one, you're going to get lost. And you won't know how to prioritize according to all the things that matter in your life. In other words, the same criteria, the same human being, even though the environments change. Another obvious thing, right? And in medicine, if a doctor prescribes you medication, you know that even if you're traveling, even if you're abroad, you have the same schedule to take that medication, no matter where you are. Nothing changes. This routine has to be respected in any environment. There's no medication that's restricted to just one area of our life. It's for all areas of our life. You should remember it. You should follow its rhythm. A matter of health. What else? Getting into the field of religion, our Christian Bible says, you shall not serve two masters at the same time. It's obvious that it gets a bit complicated, doesn't it? Because if there are two masters, these masters have their differences and each one must have their own priorities that differ from one another. In other words, not serving two masters at the same time means having a single point of reference. There's an Arabic saying that says something very similar. You won't ride two camels at the same time. Which is also pretty complicated. Look, I've tried riding just one camel. I guarantee you, it's not easy at all. Riding two must be a crazy thing. Really impossible. In other words, these principles that common sense teaches us about certain areas of life, and it seems obvious to us, it's almost silly to talk about it. In other areas we completely forget. Shall we see how interesting this is? Our concept of an individual, what does it say? It'll say that whatever we are, in fact, will be with us everywhere, without us breaking apart along the way. In other words, if you have a virtue, if you have a behavior that's conscious and that you've chosen to have, you'll use it by adapting to the conditions of the situation, but staying true to the same principles in all environments. It's obvious. I don't stop being who I am to go anywhere. If I'm fair, I'll be fair everywhere. If I'm patient, I'll be patient everywhere. That's pretty clear too. And it should be honored. There are already some doubts about that. Not everyone applies the same principles everywhere. But they should, because your identity is just one. Wherever he goes, he takes his identity with him. What Eastern philosophy calls your inner name? Another thing that's important to understand is that even if you have to adapt, adapting doesn't mean losing yourself. Oh, I have to adapt to my work environment. Maybe you have a more formal way of speaking than you do at home or with friends, but the form can be adaptable. The content is still you, with the same values, the same principles, the same laws, the same code of action, just wrapped up in a different context. Like a good car that picks up good speed on a paved road, and on a rocky dirt road, it goes much slower. But neither situation makes him stop. That's a good engine in a good car. It's still good, even if it needs to run at 20 or 80. It stays true to its principle of quality. In other words, adapting doesn't mean losing yourself. I can't give up my deep characteristics, my deep principles to fit into any scenario. Once something really interesting happened to me, and I'd like to share it with you. I was putting up a poster in Brasilia on a store's bulletin board, and a kid came by. It was a little boy who, apparently, had just learned to read. He must have just finished kindergarten, first grade, something like that. He spelled out the word that was on my poster. Philo, just philosophy. After finishing with all that excitement, he turned to me and asked, "Auntie, what is philosophy?" I gotta admit, that put me in a tight spot because I had to adjust that concept to the language of a 7-year-old. And that day made me think a lot because I realized if I only knew a memorized concept of philosophy, I wouldn't have anything to offer that kid. Because I couldn't come at him with the Pythagorean concept of love of wisdom, he wouldn't get it. If I only had the form, if I only had the box, and I didn't have the content, I wouldn't be able to adapt. But when you have the content, when you know what philosophy is, you can adapt it for a 7-year-old, for an elder, for a scholar, or for someone who hasn't had any formal education. It's able to package for those who have the product. It's able to package according to the customer's taste. That has a lot to do with our own lives. I have an essence, I have an identity, and I'm able to adapt it according to the needs of the environment. But nowhere do I stop being myself. Lucy, that's something really interesting that adds up to the point I want to take you to in our reflection today. What we are is the center. I put up a picture here. I made a small town, the center of a small town. You'll notice that when you want to create a town, when those pioneers arrive to establish a town, the first thing they do, at least in the Western world, although in the East it's a version of the same thing, is they mark a cross, hold the first Mass, and in that spot, the main church will be built, the main square, and the whole town spreads out from there. The city spreads out in all directions and takes on various roles, but this center, this heart, is always the reference point for the city's identity. It was born here and always comes back when it wants to remember its roots, when it wants to celebrate important things. This is the heart from which all life radiates. It's like that everywhere, both on a macro and micro level. Our nest of galaxies has a center, our galaxy has a center, our solar system has a center, a cell, an atom, a molecule, everything has a center. Life radiates from a center and can't lose contact with that center, or else it loses its identity. That's how we are. There's a center of identity within us. It's what our consciousness has already illuminated about our human nature. What I already know about my human nature. Be it all the principles, all the values, the little bit of wisdom I've already gained. That's my center. Therefore, my whole life is illuminated by this center. So this center adapts to the conditions of the outskirts, but it never mutilates itself. It never stops being what it is. So, if a city goes through a big crisis and some of the more distant neighborhoods start getting deserted, it begins to adapt to the circumstances on the outskirts. The center, in general, stays the same, as preserved as possible, despite all the crises. This is a principle that happens outside and should also happen inside. Our center, our identity, should be present in any circumstance. Always the same. just adapted to the conditions of the terrain. Well, but where is Lucia trying to go with all this? We'll get there soon. Do these things seem obvious? Not really. By the way, let me tell you, our historical moment is one where the obvious is questioned the most. After 31 years at New Acropolis, teaching philosophy, I gave up saying, I'm not going to explain this because it's obvious, because this is the time to question the logical foundations of human life, human thought, human principles. Everything has to be explained all over again. So, all these principles I've explained to you so far, which really boil down to just one, is the consistency across all areas of the same idea, of the same principle. We're talking about coherence. That's really questioned these days. You've probably heard, for example, about the debate in the field of education regarding who gets to educate the blessed child. There's a book written by an educator from Sao Paulo named Dante Donatelli called Who Educates Me? He talks about this debate and says, well, it's comical, and I agree with him, it's comical. Because if you're willing to educate someone and you're a parent, for example, you only educate within the confines of your own home, meaning your own kids. When you step outside your little fence, the kids you run into on the street, the people you encounter on public transport, at your job, you don't have any concern as an educator. There, you don't have to set an example for anything. There, you don't have to influence anyone for the better. What kind of educator is that? A fence line educator. Inside my little fence, I'm responsible with my principles, and I set an example. Outside my little fence, I do whatever. That's an educator for show. That doesn't have any consistency. There's no center that controls your actions and coordinates them everywhere. It's a fence line virtue. I've been talking a lot about this these days. In other words, everyone educates a child. Because if a dad educates at home and he's a teacher, he educates as a teacher, educates as a dad, educates when he's on public transport. The popcorn vendor on the corner, who's also a dad, also educates as a popcorn vendor. Or else, no one educates anywhere, because it's rare for someone to be just a parent. He's a dad and a bunch of other things. What kind of virtue works in one setting and not in another? That's not truly a virtue. It's just a facade. It's a virtue just for show. And in front of a child, a teenager, who are so intuitive, they practically see right through the facades. I've taught philosophy to teenagers for many years, so I know how it is. They're still working a lot in the emotional field, in the emotional realm. So, they see right through your facade and see who you really are. They watch the signs of your actions, they observe your behavior, you're completely in front of them. They're not just tuned into what you say, but to who you are as a whole. So, you won't be an educator anywhere if you're not one everywhere. And it goes for other ethical virtues too. Companies, institutions are full of codes of ethics. And you look and see the items, it's supposed to be inside there. To them, it doesn't matter what this man does outside the door. If he's a terrible dad, if he's a terrible citizen, obviously he's not going to have that ethics anywhere. Because ethics is either everywhere your conscience is present and awake, or it's nowhere at all. There's no such thing as fence-sitting ethics. There's no such thing as fence-sitting justice, honesty, or brotherhood. In other words, I'm brotherly when the campaign I'm doing is going to be on the internet or on TV. When I walk down the street and there's someone in need, I ignore them. When there's an animal suffering, I ignore it. In other words, at this moment no one's filming me, so I'm not interested in someone else's pain. So, how many fence-sitting virtues do we practice these days? What are they? Nothing. They're just personal marketing, to serve interests, not true brotherhood. That's not brotherhood. Are we brotherly, beyond and beneath all the fences? Or is this virtue not real? That's how our life is. She seeks to reach the same level. It's like water that seeks to level itself on the same plane, at the same height. Virtues are either everywhere or nowhere at all. That's the principle of coherence, of integrity. Fundamentally, it relies on this lack of boundaries. The limit is our life as a whole and maybe even, who knows, beyond it. There are Eastern philosophies, for example, that say a true virtue can't even be taken from us by death. It's something very legitimate to be with us everywhere. Now, what about us, in our practice as philosophers? Do we think like that too? Do we follow this principle of coherence, of integrity, of our conscious human presence being effective everywhere and not just within our own little bubble? That's exactly the point I'd like to question with you all today. Do we have this awareness, even though philosophy constantly talks to us about it? Sometimes, in the subtext of our inattention, in those moments when we let slip words we don't even remember later, we sometimes leave traces of things that show our understanding of life isn't very solid or complete yet. For example, look at these traces. Philosophy takes time away from my personal life, family, my professional life, or my student life. I can't dedicate much time to these things because I do philosophy. Curious, isn't it? So, if philosophy is taking time away from these areas, where is philosophy actually good? Only in the school of philosophy. Well, what do you mean? It's not effective anywhere. Because if you understand it, if you take it on as a way to interact with the world more effectively than you did before, then why the little bubble? Why, at a certain point, do we doubt that the philosophy given to us, which is a heritage, could be bad in any context? Do you realize that this is basically incoherent? Does this violate the fundamental principle of integrity? Yeah, but sometimes, in the gaps of unconsciousness, we think like that. Shall we take a look? I always joke with my students when they ask me, and they've asked me several times, why do I believe in certain things, but when it's time to act, I do something else? I usually say that we have a mental slush fund. Do you know what a mental slush fund is? One is those ideas you believe are noble, good, and just, but you believe them in a somewhat theoretical way. When life squeezes you, when circumstances put the pressure on, you pull out the slush fund, which is what you truly believe in. Imagine the following situation. You're stuck in traffic. Plato used to say that courage is keeping the control of reason in extreme situations. In other words, a tight traffic jam and you're running late, that's an extreme situation, a situation that puts you under pressure. Keeping control of reason. So even if you remember this Platonic principle, what do you say to yourself? Ah, this Plato stuff doesn't count in this situation. In Plato's time, there weren't any traffic jams, so he doesn't know. This situation has to be my way. Then you pull out the slush fund, which is your way. What does your way do? You honk, argue with the person in front of you, cut them off, threaten to cause an accident, hurt, offend, get all worked up, and you still arrive at your appointment late and completely stressed out. You know what that means. It means you're dealing with a basic inconsistency and maybe you're not even aware of it. There has to be a moment where you sit down with yourself and pull out that slush fund for a chat and say, look, buddy, you're wrong, your way is a mess. Plato's way would have been much better. Plato didn't experience traffic, but he deeply understood human nature, so his advice can apply to any context. If I had followed his advice, life would be much better, and I would have handled it way better. So, buddy, it's just a load of nonsense from you. I don't give any more credit to what you have to say to me. Do you guys get that? We have to start firing the slush fund, getting it out of the way. Those are the beliefs that, when life gets tough, we turn to them. So, all the teachings we receive remain theoretical. What we're going to have here is basically an analysis of that. When you tell me that philosophy gets in the way at work, in a family setting, in a personal setting, or in a school environment, in any of these three worlds, why does it get in your way? Does it really get in your way? Let's take a look. What would it tell you to do in those moments? Isn't it better than what you do without it? Shall we bring this sweet slush fund out into the open for a discussion? And see if it has any point. What do you need to be a good family member? Shall we consider a few factors? I've listed a few factors, maybe you'll think of some others. But let's start with these, which I think are just right. What do you need to be a good family member in your various roles, like being a dad, a son, a brother, a husband, wife, whatever it may be? First of all, patience. Obviously, living together requires patience, self-control, and knowing how to step away from your rigid beliefs to listen to the other person to understand their process. In short, living together relies heavily on patience. And even more so in the family setting, because we tend to bring an informality into this area that's sometimes over the top. An informality where we let our wild side loose, when our wild side should never be let loose. Our wild side, which is our instincts, our compulsions, should always be under our conscious control. Just because people are closer to you doesn't mean you can unleash your wild side on them. That's just ridiculous. And sometimes we realize the mistake of this concept when we lose these people. And we say, wow, I did things I should never have done to someone I loved so much. In other words, in these family moments, you need to have patience. Does philosophy help with that? I've brought you some principles here for you to think about. Some from Epictetus, primarily from Epictetus in The Art of Living, but also some from other philosophers. Epictetus says, our inner life depends on us, external things do not. That's why trying to control them leads to frustration, anxiety, and a tendency to criticize. You need to have calm and self-control. In other words, trying to control external things, instead of appreciating them, learning from them, and knowing how to deal with them from your own perspective, is a point of conflict that will never end. And you end up hurting people. And neither of them grows in this relationship, which is the main purpose of being together, a parallel to others. But for that to happen, both need to have the patience and self-control necessary to learn from each other, teach what they know, and gradually create a synthesis, respecting one another. It's not just Epictetus, you'll learn this in philosophy courses countless times from the mouths of many great philosophers. In other words, philosophy helps with that. What else? Don't think you're the owner of the truth. Here comes our friend Epictetus again, saying, give up vanity. You gotta know that you don't know. Look at the world with fresh eyes, without preconceived notions. We all know very little. Arrogance is a mask for cowardice. In other words, not thinking you're the owner of the truth means, I see things from a perspective that's not absolutely true, nor is the other person's. But for sure, my point of view has some truth to it, and so does theirs. And if we approach things with the mindset of learners wanting to grow, we can definitely exchange the best of what we have and create a synthesis where we both grow. Differences don't necessarily oppose each other. In many cases, differences complement each other. If there's this certainty, I'm not the owner of the truth. And it's one of the things that's worked on the most. Plato talks a lot about this. Socrates used to say, I only know that I know nothing. In other words, philosophy is constantly reflecting on this point. See, it's useful here too. What else? Be a factor of addition. I can't forget the words of the great Cicero, the Roman philosopher and orator, who said, make sure you're a factor of addition for the people whose lives you're part of. Notice this, constantly look at the people around you and think, does the fact that I'm in their lives help them grow as human beings? Or am I clipping the wings of the people around me? Because living with someone who clips your wings throughout life, at some point you might look at them and say, it would have been better if I had never met you. In other words, we can be a subtractive factor in people's lives. And here Epictetus also says, take care of your thoughts, words, and actions so that they bring out the best in the people around you. In other words, always think about being a factor of addition. Be concerned about this. Your life has value not just for you, but for everyone else, all those it touches. In a bit, we're going to see Epictetus's concept of happiness, which has a lot to do with this. Your life has value for yourself and for everyone you touch. In other words, philosophy has a lot to say about that too. And not just theory, practice. These men lived like this, these men were like this. It's a life testimony and not just some fancy intellectual phrase. What else? Keeping conversations at a good level, This relaxation and too much informality sometimes makes us let our guard down too much in the family environment. In other words, this concession of ours, this excessive informality, ends up lowering the group's overall awareness because we don't really know how to control our conversations, knowing what's valid and worthy to say to others. At this point, Epictetus also comes in with a beautiful phrase. Check it out. Speak only with good intentions. Don't dump your mental flow on others. Frivolities, exposed intimacies, criticisms, vulgarities. You become what you pay attention to. Try to elevate conversations or stay quiet. You become what you pay attention to. It really reminds me of the biblical phrase, by your works you shall be known. The trail you leave behind says a lot about you. And your trail is thought, word, and action. In other words, watch out for coarse, vulgar words, bad taste humor, and exposed intimacies. Don't hurt the people you live with in your family. Be careful with the idea that you can do anything here. You can't. These are the people you love the most, so you owe them your best. And you can't do everything. This is also a constant teaching of philosophy. I look at the world today and wonder where we would learn this, so necessary for our family life, if not through philosophy. I joined New Acropolis when I was pretty young. I was 24, but I'll tell you, I didn't know any of this stuff. Absolutely nothing. Where in today's society do they teach these things to people? It's always a coercion according to certain dogmas, out of fear, out of desire, this internal conviction that principles are the most precious thing we have, they're the jewel of our life. Where do we learn this? So, once again, a point for philosophy, it teaches you this too. Be collaborative in tasks and finances. In other words, be co-responsible, just like each cell in our body is co-responsible for the life of the whole. And when a cell goes off on a bit of a solo career, it can jeopardize the life of the whole body. Here I brought you a quote from St. Augustine, which is really beautiful. It's a precept, a piece of advice. He says, if you need a hand, remember that I have two to offer you. In other words, the principle of collaboration is one of the things that define the character of a true human being. Always be willing, within the limits of your principles, within the limits of your values, to add value to someone else's life. It's not about helping with just anything, because helping with certain things means being complicit in vices. But to grow, always count on me. In fact, I use this phrase a lot when I talk about what parents should say to their kids, children, teenagers, young people, to rise, always count on me, to fall, fall on your own. And that's an act of love. Being complicit in weaknesses is pure selfishness, it's demagoguery, it's wanting to be loved at any cost. So this generosity, this collaboration, everything that's worthwhile, working together, walking together, that's also something that's extremely necessary in our family life. Another point for philosophy, it teaches us a lot about this too. It not only teaches us, but also shows us how to practice this within our own spaces. It's a lab where we rehearse all these things. Laboratory, maybe some of you know, comes from labor and oratio, work and prayer. In other words, it's a space where we redeem ourselves from the mundane, a space that has a sacred character, where we give our best, not just to stay there, but to extend it to our whole life. Being supportive and empathetic with others' pains within family life, that's fundamental. People have their cycles, oh, but he's so weak, that's a weakness, that's nonsense. Look, remember Confucius who said, you lost a leg, don't belittle the pain of your companion, who cries for having a wound on a fingernail. In other words, a wound on a fingernail. For him, it hurts a lot within the context of his life, in that moment of vulnerability. Not that you're going to overestimate someone else's troubles, but you will be supportive and help them, yes, to broaden that perspective, so that he himself realizes that it's not that significant, but never humiliating or belittling someone else's pain. In other words, once again our friend Epictetus has a beautiful quote here too. Try to understand the other person's reasons and try to forgive them. Forgiving others and yourself grants us serenity. Every progress is gradual. In other words, accept the level where the other person is, be understanding about that little thing, which might seem small to you, but at the stage that person is at, it's huge. Don't make inappropriate comparisons. It doesn't mean that just because you've overcome that level of pain, you're superior to that person. Human nature is a mystery. Suddenly, she sums up an experience and it goes past you like a jet plane. Don't underestimate people, don't label them, but be able to understand and help them take a step up. Get out of that context, get out of that scenario. Is that very familiar? Yeah. Is this really necessary with the people around us? A lot. This is a fundamental element for family life to work out. Does philosophy teach you that? Totally. It teaches theoretically, it teaches practically. Because every time you come among us, you'll be treated that way. And we try to put that into practice. We have the spirit of improvement, not perfection. But we don't give up fighting for this behavior. We believe in it and strive to honor it through practice. And you need that to be a good professional. Maybe some of you know this even better than I do, but shall we check out the items I picked for this? Get rid of competitiveness and think like a team. Nowadays, in the job market, knowing how to work in a team is considered a huge asset. You know why? Everyone wants to compete with everyone else and be the biggest target. Nowadays it's tough. I once heard a musician say that it's hard to form a choir today because people don't want their individual voice to disappear within the whole. They want to sing louder, they want to stand out. In other words, today there's a mindset in society that success is always built on someone else's failure. You can't work as a team, you have to stand out within the team. You have to come in first place and have everyone else defeated. It doesn't make sense. There's no flavor if everyone comes in first place. We weren't taught to win together. We were taught to win over others. Success, standing out, means you climbed up and a bunch of people are left down there, green with envy. And people want that. And they're taught this from a very young age. So working in a team today isn't without reason, it's something really complicated. What does philosophy say about this? Here comes our friend Epictetus, in The Art of Living, who says this: free your heart from ambition and fear, and don't aspire to be anything other than the best version of yourself. In other words, stop competing with others. If you want to compete, try to be better than you were yesterday, last week, last month, last year. Compare yourself only to yourself. And even so, don't be so hard on yourself. But notice if small steps are being taken. There's an Indian sutra, the Mahaprajna Paramita, which I find really beautiful. It says, go together, beyond the beyond, to the ultimate realization. In other words, it's a divine moral precept that says, go to the ultimate realization, but hey, don't go alone, go together. For these divine beings, they're not interested in someone who races ahead, they're interested in someone who can walk with everyone else. That's philosophy. It's a learning that today in the market has huge value. Philosophy teaches you this. So today, they're even launching courses for this, called soft skills, to help develop virtues within a company. Once again, just a little fence. These are virtues meant for you to have only within the company. I don't believe they work. Either you change your whole life, or you enlighten your whole life, or it won't work out. It's going to be a mask. It's going to be a virtue just for show. What else? Knowing how to lead. That too, wow, there are so many leadership courses out there. It's something really obvious that philosophy constantly talks about. If you can't lead yourself, how are you going to lead others? If you try to do something you think is noble, just, and good, and inertia doesn't let you, passions don't let you, instincts don't let you, then you're not a leader of yourself. So, how are you going to lead others? If you notice a factor, I've often seen it, because I'm a worker, too, and I've had to go through this kind of training. If you stop to observe our body, our head, our mind, it leads the body. How does it lead? Does it only think about itself and disregard the well-being of the rest of the body? She'd be crazy, because she knows that would be suicide. What she's after, is it good just for her, or is it good for the body as a whole? Always good for the body as a whole. Even if she's reading a book, she's learning more self-control, learning to manage her dietary or instinctive compulsions. That's good for the body too. A body is much better taken care of when it has a wise mind than when it has an ignorant one. So, the mind, as the leader of the body, is a very perfect leader. Philosophy teaches you to learn from life. It teaches you to have a symbolic vision and to learn from everything. This is also one of the fundamental elements that philosophy develops. And here I brought you a quote from Plato, where he says, "The one who is not a good learner will not be a good master." In other words, if you intend to lead someone, you'll be like the master of that group. You'll make them learn something through your words and through your example. Do you have the ability to learn through someone else's words and example? Or do you have that hierarchical mindset that's always looking up, thinking about how to surpass someone, and looking down, afraid of being surpassed by someone else? Do you spend your whole life competing or learning? Because the one who only competes and sees life as a bunch of hierarchical positions stacked from top to bottom, always scheming to climb one more step, that person will never be a good leader. He doesn't have team spirit. He doesn't think about the body. That's a mind that's going to kill the body in no time. And does philosophy teach that? It teaches that too. It guides us to have the drive for improvement. Because we're we should constantly be finding these character flaws in ourselves and sanding them down, smoothing out the rough edges, trying to grow. We're not perfect beings, we're far from it. But the drive for improvement is what ensures the integrity of our character. We make a mistake, we get up, learn from it, and keep trying. And that's how you get everything in the world, through rhythm, perseverance, and consistency. What else? In the career of a good professional, what things are useful? Having the three authorities without belittling human authority. Knowing how to get along. Do you guys know what the three authorities are? First, intellectual authority. You're the leader of a work group, you gotta know the job. Obviously, if there's any employee who knows the job better than you, it gets a bit tricky. You have to try to master it to be able to lead. Knowing what needs to be done, the goal that needs to be achieved, in other words, knowing the process. There's moral authority, which is doing things together. It's not the one who's behind giving orders, it's the one who's out front, leading, participating, doing it together. And last but not least, human authority, which is the one that considers that a job well done doesn't just mean that things are done with quality in the end. A job well done is when things are done with quality and people are doing well. In other words, at the end of the day, we can't forget that the greatest product of any of our activities is the building of human beings. A human being can't just be taken as a means. As Immanuel Kant used to say, it's the greatest immorality to take a human being as a means. The human being is an end in itself. We're here to build ourselves and through our example, build up everyone else. With this human authority, which is taught by philosophy, you gain a huge advantage, both in leadership and in getting along with others in general. Humanism always adds value to getting along with others. Philosophy teaches this all the time. This is one of the most important goals we've set, which is the idea of universal brotherhood. Once again, there's a phrase from Taoism here that goes like this: the great leader is the one whom people say, "We did it." In other words, the great leader is the one who, when everything is done, everyone feels like they own that product. Lao Tzu himself, in the Tao Te Ching, says a phrase that I find really beautiful. He says, "Of the wise ones from the past, you can only say that they existed." They're noticed when they're missing. They're so subtle that they're only noticed when they're missing. They don't impose themselves on others just to make their own name stand out, using others as mere pawns. In other words, the whole group wins when a good leader wins. And that's human authority. That's an excellent way to get along. And philosophy teaches this all the time. Continuing, what do you need to be a good professional? Have good ideas, your own ideas, be inspired and be creative. Wow, in a critical moment like this, people are walking around with a lamp lit at noon, just like Diogenes of Sinope did, looking for someone creative, someone innovative, someone who can find a way out that isn't caught up in all these things burned by the crisis, someone who can find the light at the end of the tunnel. That's highly valued. Philosophy helps with that. Let's take a look at the phrase, once again, from our Epictetus. Be wary of social conventions. The new isn't necessarily good. Support only what makes sense in terms of justice, humanity, kindness, etc. In other words, what Epictetus is saying here: step out of the mass mindset, the collective thinking. Have a reference to find good alternatives. Your principles will always find a path where everyone else says there isn't one. Because people are often driven by their selfish interests. Therefore, everything that leads to a collective good, that leads to a collective achievement, is a path that's still in front of them, but they don't see it. If you're guided by principles, you'll always find the best paths. If a person is given to creativity, true innovation, which isn't just a variation on the same theme, but a path that preserves the humanity of all those who will walk it. In other words, philosophy helps develop your own ideas, boosts creativity, and encourages thinking outside the box more than anything. That's amazing. Sometimes I look at society and I'm amazed. People are going back and forth on an issue, having roundtable discussions, and they're all suggesting the same thing. I mean, someone who's done the first level at New Acropolis is already more creative than that group over there. It's a stuck way of thinking, a vicious cycle of ideas. And people get stuck in there, they can't get out. There wasn't this encouragement to search, based on your own common sense, based on your own identity, which needs to be recognized, on the inner life that develops, that makes us realize who we are. From these references, finding unexpected paths, people don't learn that anywhere. Is this a commodity among valued stocks in the market? Just be. Those are the CEOs of big companies who have a little bit of that today. They're kings in the world. Does philosophy teach that? It teaches a lot. And way more than any current business course. I've been around these courses, I repeat. Look, I'm going to tell you, they're incredibly lacking. Philosophy is a treasure trove of teachings that would be extremely valued in this market if they knew about it. What else? Be organized and economical. Also, any company needs someone who practices order and practices economy, which is the concept of efficiency, reaching the maximum, getting the best possible result for you and your team with the resources you have. In other words, knowing how to use resources like time, space, life, and supplies in general in the most moderate and sensible way possible. Philosophy teaches that. Here we have our friend Epictetus again. Practicing moderation is necessary. Having possessions that fit your needs like a shoe fits your foot. Don't become a slave to whims. In other words, philosophy will teach detachment, how we need very few things to live as human beings, and that everything given to us, time, space, our life, the life of others, is a gift that must be tremendously well managed, tremendously respected. For that, sometimes, a philosopher with very little does things that no one else does. I remember a moment from the life of Diogenes of Sinope. You guys have probably heard of this philosopher. He belonged to an earlier school, to Euclideanism, which is cynicism. He lived inside a barrel. And there was a philosopher, quote unquote, from that time, who was Aristippus of Cyrene, who was a Cyrenaic, as the name suggests. He created the Cyrenaic school. And the Cyrenaic school valued comfort and pleasure a lot. And this Aristippus was always flattering a certain king of a people who lived around Greece. One day, Aristippus, passing through Athens, sees Diogenes eating lentils. Eating with his hands, because Diogenes had nothing. And lentils, in that context, were the most basic food you could imagine. It was like eating stale bread. It was the poorest thing you could have. And Aristippus gets all indignant about it, turns to Diogenes and says, "If you flattered a king, you wouldn't have to eat lentils, Diogenes." Diogenes, very calmly, turns to him and says, "And if you ate lentils, Aristippus, you wouldn't need to flatter any king." In other words, if I have to save, I save in the realm of dignity, in the realm of my honor, and in the material realm, lentils are just fine. In other words, the economy, the detachment, knowing how to do a lot, because this man made history. While Aristippus didn't do much, this man is still a moral teacher after 2,200 years. You get it. And what did he have? A barrel and lentils. In other words, philosophy is constantly teaching us about efficiency, about doing your best with the resources you have, and also about effectiveness, trying to put your heart into everything and create the highest quality possible. Do you learn that in philosophy? You learn a lot. What else? Take initiative and responsibility. That's highly valued in the job market. A reliable person with initiative is worth their weight in gold in the job market. Sometimes we say, there's terrible unemployment. There really is, but for men like that, there are always openings. People who have responsibility, commitment, and initiative, there are always jobs for them. And they're getting rarer and rarer. Does philosophy teach that? What do you guys think? Once again, our friend Epictetus. Evil is a byproduct of negligence, laziness, and distraction from the goals of our lives. Happiness comes from the effort we put into our personal improvement. So, what's Epictetus saying here? Commit to the goal of your life, which is to be a man as close as possible to the human ideal. Of values, virtues, and wisdom, get as close as possible to the top of the pyramid, which is the fullness a human being can have, of values, virtues, and wisdom, live in real time. Real time is measured by advances towards the tip of that pyramid. In other words, by growing as a human being. And committing to that makes you a man who knows how to honor your commitments. And you'll honor them wherever you are. And you'll find solutions and take initiative, because besides being committed, you're someone who's always looking for opportunities to take a step towards what you've committed to. They say that's where the word courage comes from, which is from cor, heart. You put your heart out there in the future. At the goal of your life, at the top of the pyramid, and the rest of your body will always be running in that direction, because it won't give up on reclaiming your heart, on finding your heart again. So, a man who is committed and responsible regarding his own human condition is a man who will be committed, responsible, and proactive in any context. Once again, philosophy helps a lot here. It creates an impeccable professional with a lot of liveliness, the ability to think for themselves, with a lot of initiative and a lot of courage. And from the perspective of a good student, I'm taking a tough course, it requires a lot of studying, and philosophy is getting in my way. Really. What does a good student need? Hey folks, some of you might know, I'm a study techniques teacher. I've been teaching this course for many years, and I really enjoy it, and I feel quite qualified to teach it because I rigorously practice the things I teach. I can tell you all with complete confidence, over these decades as a teacher, I've met people who put their entire lives on hold to study for college entrance exams or for a public service exam, studying 10 hours a day. And when I look at how they study, I realize that a well-trained philosopher with some principles of philosophy could do all that in just 2 hours a day. And I'm not bluffing. I know this field well. I've been teaching study techniques for about 20 years. So, I don't believe that philosophy gets in the way. But shall we take a look at it item by item? Let's go. A good student needs attention and concentration. What does our friend Epictetus say? Take care of this moment, this person, this challenge, this task right now. In other words, have your body and mind together, as Chow Yun used to say, in every step of your life. The habit of constantly training your concentration. There's a Zen tale that says there was a wise man who was very refined in everything he did. He came close to perfection in all his actions. And one day a disciple came to ask him, while he was peeling a fruit, what he did to be so perfect in everything he did. In other words, so close to perfection, because no one is perfect. And he was peeling a fruit and said simply, "When I'm peeling a fruit, I'm peeling a fruit. My mind, my emotions, my actions, everything about me is focused on the fruit, on the knife, on the peel that falls, and there's nothing outside of that." Philosophy has always been excellent training for that. For those of you who have studied the Bhagavad Gita, you know that the Bhagavad Gita is a part of a great Indian epic called the Mahabharata. There was a time when the Pandava and Kaurava princes were being trained together in archery, and their instructor, Drona, asked them to shoot at the eye of a wooden bird perched high in a tree. They all came, prepared their bows, and he asked them, "What do you see?" And they would answer similar things. "I see the sky, I see the clouds, I see the tree, the leaves of the tree, the bird, and the eye." He would say, "Stop, don't shoot." They all come and do the same thing, until Arjuna comes along. Arjuna aims and he asks, "What do you see?" "The eye." "And what else?" "Nothing. The eye." "You can shoot." And of course, Arjuna hits the mark. Philosophy teaches you to have a future reference point as a direction guide. But try to have your body and mind together with every step you take. That you only reach an ideal when you make every step you take ideal. You don't reach a grand future by taking mediocre steps. In other words, concentration and attention are constant practices within philosophy. It's one of the disciplines we focus on the most, and it's one of the developments that's most practiced in philosophy. And that helps a lot. What else? Learner spirit, intrinsic interest. That's another thing that's fantastic. I only want to learn when I have to take a test. You're going to be a mediocre student. Intrinsic interest. I couldn't care less about this subject. What I want is to pass. In other words, I open a workbook and say, "What a drag, what a pain to do this job just because it pays well. What a drag, what a pain to do this college course that I'm going to do, but it's good." In other words, knowledge is just a means, and a boring one, a nuisance, to reach an end that is actually good. That's how people think. That's the methodology of a mediocre student. A student who has the backing of philosophy is interested in knowledge for its own sake. And what comes next? Well, we'll see about that later. Well, it's been about 200,000 years since we've been Homo sapiens. Why are we Homo sapiens? Because of the interest in knowledge. Or have we regressed from that condition? How can it be that people see knowledge as a nuisance? I realize that in everything you do, in anything that comes up as an opportunity for knowledge, there's something you can take from it to respond better to life. There's something useful there. A direct learning, a symbolic learning. A philosopher, we're educated for this. In anything they're supposed to learn, they get interested, and they know that life is sending them a message, and if they don't get it, they'll respond worse to life's events tomorrow. Because that's how life is. It sends the lesson first and only then the test. A philosopher loves knowledge for its own sake, no matter what comes next. If I get the job, great, but if I don't, I learned a bunch of stuff. It was really useful. For us at New Acropolis, maybe you don't know much about this. When we go out to start a branch, we're all volunteers. When we start this branch, it's very common that for the first 2, 3, 10 lectures, not a single person shows up. We're still unknown in that area. We have to do the advertising ourselves. It's really common to prepare a lot for a lecture and not see anyone show up. Imagine if we could handle that if we were so focused on results. The feeling I got, I did several lectures, was, well, it's a shame they didn't come to share. But I learned a lot. That's how it is. A person with that mindset is a brilliant student. This mindset of intrinsic knowledge makes you interested in the traces of love, intelligence, and divine will wherever they may be. You stop and pay attention to everything and come away with a useful lesson for your life. I don't drink alcoholic beverages, never have because I don't like them, I don't like the taste. But one time I saw a show talking about how wine is made. The good European wineries, the ones with excellence, they take a vine and trim all the lower branches, leaving only the top to bear fruit. You know why? So that the sap makes an effort to rise and up there it produces the best fruits. You might ask me, why does that interest you if you don't like wine? It interests me because there's a life principle there, sacrificing the mundane, sacrificing lower things, so that energy and life can produce the highest fruits up there, which are the most delicious, the best products of life. I wonder if I do that, won't it work for me too? Doesn't it work in my life too? So, a show that teaches how to make wine in Europe, even for someone who doesn't drink, if it crossed your path, there's something interesting it can teach you. In other words, a student who thinks like this is a brilliant student who achieves much better results in much less time. In other words, philosophy is present there too. What else? What do you need to be a good student? The ability to synthesize your own ideas. You're not there just to compile what others have said. You're there to add your experience, your perspective. And with everything that's given to you, you're able to grasp the essence of things. For example, you read a book. You need to be able to tell me when you close the back cover, meaning when you finish your reading, what the main ideas presented there are. And know how to have a plan to investigate them, see if they're true, and if they are, to integrate them into your response to life. You have to be able to reflect on what you've read, find those main ideas and add them to your ability to respond to life, because otherwise, you're just a hoarder of information, not a learner. Everything in life requires synthesis, an event we go through, a suffering. There has to be a synthesis from that which allows us to come out the other side better, greater, because otherwise it's just suffering, and that doesn't make sense. Isn't life just sadism? Is life there to teach us? Can we always come out the other side greater? So, is this ability to synthesize, this ability to reflect that philosophy teaches, fundamental for a student? It's fundamental. The other day I met someone who does the same thing I do. Someone told me, every book I read in my life, I make a summary of the main ideas. I said, wow, that's really typical of a philosopher, really typical. If I need to give a talk the day after tomorrow about a book I read 20 years ago, I go to my little notes. I have all the main ideas there, and how many times I read, and read quickly, because it's well synthesized and well done, I integrate those ideas again. I'm a good student, and I can tell you that, modesty aside, I consider myself a pretty decent student. Who taught me this? Philosophy. With the amount of stuff I do in a week, I'm not even going to tell you how much I have to read each week, sometimes even daily. I consider myself a good student. Who gave me this? Philosophy. What else? Rhythm, responsibility. Once again, who's going to talk about this? Our friend Epictetus. Examine new ventures in detail. Once you find them valid, give yourself to them wholeheartedly. In other words, examine what you're going to do before committing. When you commit, without rush and without pause. In other words, rhythm is what sustains life. Is it the rhythm of your heart? Is it the rhythm of your breathing? Is it the peristaltic rhythm of your intestines? Life is sustained by rhythms. That the life of a student, which is continuous learning, integrating knowledge to come out stronger on the other side, also depends on rhythm and responsibility. In other words, everything that comes my way, I'm going to face it with the seriousness of someone who truly wants to learn. And not just accumulate information. I'm going to commit to this at the right pace, one that lets me read, assimilate, integrate, and respond to life. I'm not going to take long breaks, because long breaks, in my heart, would kill me. A good student, among the things he packs in his backpack for vacation, definitely has a book. You know why? Because he likes to learn. It's not a torture that he leaves locked up at home during vacation. He likes to learn. He digs it. If learning is torture, well, you're definitely not going to be a good student. and philosophy places learning as one of the most enjoyable aspects of life. Philosophy helps with that too. So, with these brief discussions we've had about these three areas, family, work, studies, I think we can conclude, quite confidently, that philosophy gives you things, it doesn't take things away. It adds a dimension to everything you do, anywhere, and not just in a philosophy class. It's with you everywhere you go, and it enhances your actions in the world, whatever they may be. From the way you take care of your plants to how you handle your paperwork at work. How you preserve everything you use, how you respect the environment, how you respect the people around you. Philosophy is with you everywhere, or it's nowhere at all. And when it's with you, it adds a lot of value to your life. Whatever it is that you do. It's said that once Plato was having a discussion with someone. This person was bringing up the most bizarre professions in the world to him, and he would say how philosophy could improve their performance in that job, whether it was carrying loads at the docks, handling animals, whatever it was, and it said he didn't leave a single situation unanswered. I believe in that. Philosophy can add value to everything if it's lived the right way, which is exactly what we're aiming to teach. A philosophy as an art of living, a philosophy for life. Well, imagine this statement, this expression. You might find it funny, but it really clarifies the idea I want to convey. I believe in God, but I'm going to leave him at home because he gets in the way at work. Who would say something like that? Obviously, if you believe in God, you take him with you everywhere you go, and in every place, he enlightens your actions. You might say to me, well, but you're comparing philosophy to God. Philosophy isn't a religion. No, philosophy isn't a religion. But let me tell you something. If you love God, you also love his attributes, right? Imagine me telling you, I really like someone, I like so-and-so, but I don't like the way she talks, the way she walks, her topics, the way she dresses, the way she behaves. You'd say, hold on, you don't like so-and-so, you don't like any of her traits. Obviously, loving God means loving his attributes. And what are God's attributes? Values, virtues, and wisdom, which is exactly what philosophy teaches. In other words, taking God silently and motionless everywhere has very little value. You take God with all his attributes. And who trains you in these attributes? Philosophy. And it makes you believe that they are in God, but they're also like seeds, possibilities within you. Waiting to be awakened. Be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. That's what the Bible says, right? And in all the world's traditions, there are equivalent phrases. Philosophy shows you that these seeds exist. And they can and should be cultivated. But if I can live philosophy everywhere, I can learn it everywhere too. Isn't that right? Isn't it possible to think like that? You're telling me I can live philosophy everywhere, so why do I need to go to New Acropolis? Yeah, that's right, my friend. Imagine you want to be a doctor, but you don't go to college. You practice medicine like Leonardo da Vinci did. Do you know how it was? Back then, they didn't put bodies in freezers because they didn't exist. So he would spend days in hiding. The body would rot, and he'd be dissecting it and making sketches in secret, often risking getting sick from the smell coming from there. Are you going to do that? No. You're going to take advantage of everything that's been developed throughout the history of medicine and learn from there. I want to make an airplane. Are you going to learn to make airplanes like Santos Dumont did? No, you're going to go to ITA and see all the technology in aeronautical engineering that's been developed up to now. You're not going to waste that time. You're not going to risk your life falling off some rickety contraption, because even making a 14 bis is tough. You're going to take everything that's been developed and start from there. What else? You want to measure the Earth. You're going to try to measure it like Empedocles did. Walking from one place to another on foot, counting the steps, and setting up 2 poles to see the angle of the shadow at the same time on the same day of the year. You're going to do it. Nobody's going to do that. Nobody's going to do that anymore. You're going to start from what humanity has already developed. Why is it that when it comes to human life, we don't want to listen to anyone who has developed the art of living to its fullest potential? Look, I'll tell you, it's easier to study medicine, measure the earth, or do any other job, starting from scratch, than it is to start from scratch and get to know yourself. That's exactly a quote from Jung that we use a lot. Carl Jung, the founder of analytical psychology, who was also quite the philosopher, has a saying, "It's easier to start from scratch and develop a machine that takes you to the moon than to start from scratch and develop an understanding that takes you inside yourself." The human being, with all its bodies, with all its structures, is incredibly complex to start from scratch. We've got a group of people who developed this and knew how to give a human response to life. They left a trail of humanity. Why would we want to start from scratch and learn from our own perceptions? In other words, I'm not going to learn aeronautical engineering at ITA. I'm going to learn based on my own perceptions of what's needed from ITA. In any other field, that would be absurd. Why do we accept that here? Let's think that if things are absurd in one field, they are in all the others. The universe seeks stability at the same level. A single law. You can't serve two masters at the same time, like we've already said. There's a very famous quote, and they've attributed it to 1,000 authors on the internet, but it actually belongs to a letter written by Isaac Newton to a friend named Robert Crook, where he said, "If I see so far, it's because I'm standing on the shoulders of my ancestors." That was Isaac Newton, who, for those who don't know, had a whole philosophical life behind his scientific development. He was a great philosopher and knew very well how things are. So, if you have a school of philosophy and want to learn how to live, it's like wanting to learn how to build airplanes and having ITA. Lucky you, 'cause you wouldn't get very far on your own. Imagine us living our ordinary lives and reaching the conclusions that Plato did. Well, he already came and offered you this for free, and you can start from where he left off. Are you going to pass that up? Do you think we'll get very far like that? And why would we pass that up? Everyone who knew how to live liked to teach. Why would we pass that up? It's foolish. We wouldn't get anywhere thinking like that. Khalil Gibran used to say something that I think is beautiful. He used to say that all of us should be stations for enriching the gifts of life. In other words, all the gifts of life pass through us, but we don't let them pass the same way they arrived. We add a little bit more. My life experience, what I've realized, what I've been able to sense, to experience, what inspired me, I add a little bit of value to that and pass it on. Because none of life's gifts are mine. I'm a mediator. They honor me by passing through my life, and I honor them by adding my life experience and making them even greater. And that's the logic of life. In other words, receive the pitcher and add your sip before passing it on. Philosophy is allowing you to distill your sip in all areas of your life. In other words, not living in vain. Not passing on that pitcher with the same amount or even less. Look, it's not hard to notice. Just observe the famous thinkers of our time. I've been doing that a lot lately. You see what they say. It's a mix of other people's ideas, quotes from others, politically correct jargon, and well-placed jokes. You look there, using a bit of logic, for what their ideas are. You're hardly going to find it. If you find me, show me. If you find it, show me. Because these days it's really rare to find a thinker with their own ideas, someone who can add that sip, which is expected of them, to the pitcher of knowledge that life has offered them. Philosophy, true philosophy, teaches you to do that and fulfill your debt to nature. It gives you everything, and you add your part. Your note, that word the Greeks called eros logos, the sacred word. You add what you've distilled from your life experience and make humanity a little richer. Contribute to nature's work. Don't live in vain. Who stands up to trendy thinking on their own? This is another thing that's really interesting to remember, which is another contribution of philosophy. Trendy thinking is like a steamroller. This is no joke, folks. especially because there's this subliminal idea that if you don't think like everyone else, you're dumb, you're ignorant, and you're going to be looked down on by everyone. Now there's this cancel culture. You're going to get canceled by everyone or by someone at some point. In other words, because of neediness, insecurity, or lack of courage to live your own life, you get steamrolled by the collective thinking. I did an experiment a few years ago trying to find out what the trendy thoughts were in 5 different historical moments. You know what conclusion I came to. Trends have never been good advisors. The men who made history were generally out of fashion, not in it. Philosophy helps you develop authenticity. And authenticity is too tough for any steamroller to crush. Authenticity, your own ideas, your own life, being yourself, having your center, having your essence. Let your being, through your personality, give its message to the world. Philosophy helps you find that. It's a tool for that. In other words, it also protects you from being steamrolled by the collective and not getting your message out to the world. I'll give you a bit of the Buddhist teaching you studied in the first level, which says, more than 1,000 meaningless words, one single word that brings comfort to the listener is worth more. Have you already spoken your word? Philosophy helps you find it. In the collective, it's really tough. It's interesting if we notice that schools of philosophy have always existed for this purpose. They're a bunch of people come together who have the habit of thinking, of seeking their own ideas, of lighting up the future with principles, with values, of seeking wisdom. And these people, even though they're all individuals, they encourage each other in the craft of being themselves. And they harmonize through their differences, like the colors of a beautiful painting or the notes of a lovely melody. They harmonize without canceling out their individualities. And there, they guarantee each other the right to be that way. Imagine I give you a bamboo stick and say, break it. You easily bend it at the knee and break it. And if I tie it up really tight, without the bamboo stick, and make the same request, break it. Do you think you can do it that easily? I don't think so. In other words, this combination of individualities that philosophy provides makes us much more resistant to the clashes of massification. It protects us from being crushed by that steamroller, which we would hardly withstand on our own. There's an Eastern tale that I find really beautiful. It's the tale of the fireplace, which goes like this. There was a man who belonged to a school of philosophy. He practiced there, was growing a lot, but at a certain point, his wife demanded more of his presence at home, wanted more of his time, and he was pressured into it, gave in, and decided he was going to be a thinker on his own at home. So then, his teacher, his master, who guided him in that school, there are many schools of philosophy in the East, even though academic philosophy doesn't talk much about it, that master who guided him decides to pay him a visit. And then the young man, when he sees his master at the door, says, he's already come to ask me to return to the school. His master talks to him, smiling warmly, and he invites him in, and the two of them sit down in front of the fireplace in the small house. And they just sit there, staring at the fireplace. There was a brazier with several logs of wood that were there burning, red hot. And there was one log that had been less destroyed by the fire. It was bigger than all the others, and it radiated more heat. It seemed like it was the boss among those logs, the one with the most fire. It really seemed like it could hold its own. Then the master, slowly, without saying a word, takes a piece of wood, goes near the fireplace and moves that powerful log away, placing it alone, away from the others, in a corner. And he sits down again. That log, which was the biggest, the most powerful among all the logs, by itself, it quickly cools down and goes out, while the others together keep burning. And the two of them watching that, and the master gets up and leaves. The lesson was given. Think about that for a bit. The young man understood. I've brought here a very simple drawing, a slanted line, which is basic. It's the fundamental law of life, saying that life is simply a journey that starts from one point, which is ignorance, and reaches another point, which is wisdom. There you go. That's life in a nutshell. That's life. Life is about, we came here for this, moving from ignorance and taking at least one step, maybe two, towards wisdom. And then you had real time and a life worthy of a human being. And who's there along the way, encouraging you to climb? Philosophy. What is philosophy? It's love of wisdom. You guys know that. Philos Misophos. Philosophy of Masophy. Do you know what that means? You can seek wisdom because you're getting knocked around, because you're suffering, because there's no other way, or you might not even seek it and just stay put. Or you can seek wisdom because you love it, because someone taught you that it's the most delightful thing in the world, the thing that holds the most value, that brings the most happiness to you and everyone around you, in your family, at your job, in your community, in the world. In other words, philosophy awakens the love for wisdom. If you want to know if it's necessary, ask yourself, going somewhere because you're forced to, is it the same as going somewhere because you love it tremendously and are super motivated to go there? Could you say it's the same thing? If your answer is no, you recognize the value of philosophy, which is a timeless treasure of humanity. As long as there's a person who hasn't reached wisdom yet, philosophy will be an extremely useful tool. Want to try without it? All right, but know that nothing will excuse you from this journey from ignorance to wisdom. This journey is the Dharman of the Hindus. This journey is the law of Mat, of Piddletep, your code. This journey is the precepts of Confucius' heaven. It's not up for debate, it's determined. There's no shortcut or way to escape it. You'll have to face it no matter what. Because that's the necessary path for every human being. Now, if you go with people who walk alongside you, loving your goal and teaching you to love it, or go alone, it's your choice. But no one lets you off the hook from the duty of being more human. Philosophy offers you the chance to do it out of duty and out of desire. Out of duty and out of love. And do it with great company. It's your choice. Finally, to wrap up our chat, which has gone on for quite a while, I brought two quotes for you. A Platonic one, which I absolutely love this quote. It was stuck on my closet door for a long time, which was like my oracle, because it inspires me so much. And it says the following: the best thing we can do for those we love is to grow as human beings. I repeat, the best thing you can do for those you love is to grow as human beings. I need to spend more time with them. Do you need to? More or better? Would your kid prefer a dad who's around all the time, but is totally rude and ignorant, or a dad who's around less, but is wise, knows how to understand him, gives good advice, knows how to guide him, knows how to encourage him? Is it a matter of quality or a matter of quantity? What could you give him? Of value that didn't come from your own wisdom. An apartment. Look, in a social crisis, the first things to go are apartments, are possessions. If you have any doubts, just look at what happened to the upper class during the war in Serbia with their amazing apartments. In the middle of a crisis, the best legacy you can leave them is values, virtues, because those protect in any circumstance. The others don't. The others are the first to leave us. In other words, philosophy helps you grow as a human being, so you have something to give to others. Philosophy helps you exercise your generosity by having something valuable to give. Because goodwill, without any substance, is not very effective. I'd really like to help, but I have nothing. Philosophy gives you things that are, in fact, assets. They are, in fact, values, and that can add value to people's lives in the real world. And lastly, a piece from a Greek poet I really admire, Pindar. He has a very concise but very inspiring phrase. He says, "Be who you are, knowingly." Philosophy helps you be who you are. I point you to the path for that discovery, and the path to maintaining that discovery, and the path to communicating that discovery to the world, so that others can see you as a light at the end of the tunnel. Think about that. Here speaks someone with 31 years of philosophy, so I'm not talking about theories, I'm talking about life. I hope this gives you something good to think about.